They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you love. But what happens when it is not just betrayal, but accusation? When your own blood brands you as something you're not, strips away your dignity, and paints you as a villain in the home where you once felt safest. That's where my story begins, with whispers that weren't whispers at all, but daggers. My aunts looking at me with pity, my cousins smirking behind their hands, and my parents avoiding my eyes as if I had disgraced them. The word, thief, clung to me like poison perfume, staining every room I entered. I remember sitting at the family dinner table, hands trembling, when my father's voice, usually steady, cut across the silence. "We know you took the money. Just admit it." I wanted to scream, to swear on every fiber of my being that it wasn't me, but the eyes that once trusted me now looked at me as if I were a stranger. The money, 12,000 in savings meant for the family's small business, was gone, and somehow, the story had twisted until my name was engraved on the crime. That night, staring at the ceiling, rage bloomed in me like wildfire. If they wanted me to wear the mask of a thief, then I would keep quiet until the truth I uncovered burned every false accuser to ash. Silence became my shield in those weeks, but inside me, a storm was brewing. Every word thrown at me, every suspicious glance, carved scars across my chest, yet those scars only hardened into resolve. I replayed the day the money went missing over and over in my mind. Who had access, who had motive, who suddenly started living a little differently? It wasn't me, but someone had been clever, leaving breadcrumbs that pointed to me while they walked free. My brother Daniel, the golden boy of the family, never once spoke up for me. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with that practiced, sorrowful expression, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe his own sibling would sink so low. The worst part, everyone believed him. They believed his quiet sighs and smiles more than my tearful denials. At night, I'd hear him humming in his room, his voice dripping with satisfaction, like a man who had not only gotten away with something, but enjoyed the performance of his innocence. But I started noticing things: receipts shoved carelessly into his backpack, a new watch glinting on his wrist, nights where he slipped out and came home smelling of expensive liquor. He thought he was untouchable, that no one would dare suspect the family's shining sun. What he didn't know was that I was watching him, recording every detail like pieces of a puzzle. And one day I promised myself, the puzzle would be complete. The house felt colder with every passing day, not because of the weather, but because of the distance between me and the people I once called my safe place. My mother barely spoke to me anymore, only giving clipped orders or silent stares, as though the weight of my supposed crime had aged her overnight. My father's disappointment was like a shadow that followed me, heavy and suffocating. Yet Daniel thrived in that atmosphere. He slipped into the role of the dutiful son so seamlessly it was almost a performance, consoling my parents, patting their backs as if he too carried the burden of shame I had brought. And yet, beneath the mask, I saw the smirk that curled at the corners of his lips when he thought I wasn't looking. That smirk fueled me. I began collecting evidence in secret. I followed him at night, hiding in the dark when he left the house. I saw him meeting people I didn't recognize, handing over envelopes, laughing in the glow of neon signs. One evening, I even caught sight of him slipping into a jewelry shop, where he paid in cash for a gold chain that gleamed like arrogance around his neck. The next day, every detail I gathered, I wrote down, catalog, stored like weapons I'd one day unleash. Still, the ache of betrayal gnawed at me. The knowledge that my parents would rather believe the lies of their golden child than the truth in my eyes. But that ache was transforming into something sharper, deadlier. Not just pain. Revenge. It was a Sunday morning when my father gathered everyone in the living room, his jaw tight, his hands clenched around the armrest of his chair. He had just come back from meeting one of his old friends, who had lent him money to cover the stolen amount, and I could see the humiliation in his eyes. "We raised you better than this," he said, his voice trembling but firm, staring straight at me as though no shadow of doubt remained. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls apart, to drag Daniel's smug face into the center of the room and watch their expressions when his lies unraveled. But no, it wasn't time. Not yet. Instead, I swallowed the fire in my chest and lowered my gaze, playing the part of the defeated scapegoat. Daniel's hand reached over to pat Father's shoulder, his voice smooth as silk. "We'll get through this. Don't worry, Dad." The hypocrisy nearly made me choke. Later that evening, while the house settled into uneasy quiet, I slipped into Daniel's room. My heart hammered as I pulled open drawers, careful not to make a sound. And then I found it. a shoebox tucked under his bed, filled with receipts, crumpled bills, and a small ledger scribbled in his handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. Proof. Proof that he had been taking money long before the 12,000 even disappeared. Proof that he had turned me into the family villain to cover his own tracks. I clutched the shoebox to my chest like a weapon, the taste of victory finally blooming on my tongue. Soon, Daniel's golden mask would shatter, and when it did, I would make sure every piece cut him. Ta-da-ja. Holding that shoebox felt like holding a detonator. Every page I turned was another wire I could pull to collapse the lie that held my family captive. For a night I barely slept, not because I feared being discovered, but because the possibilities bloomed like fireflies. Small, electric, impossible to ignore. I photographed the receipts with my phone, zooming in on dates and amounts, and I copied lines from the ledger into a notebook I kept hidden inside a false bottom drawer beneath my bed. Each entry was a fingerprint: late night withdrawals, payments made to names I didn't recognize, a pattern that pointed straight to Daniel's need for money. Not need in the urgent sense, but appetite, a thirst for more, for status, for the life he'd been pretending to have. I mapped it all out like a detective plotting a case, except this case had a personal score to settle. Then I planted small seeds. In the days that followed I let slip subtle remarks at family gatherings about funny coincidences, how quickly Daniel had fixed his phone, how a new jacket had appeared, how an unexpected delivery had come in when no one was home. I watched their reactions, brows furrowing, quick looks exchanged. I let them think perhaps my mind was fraying, perhaps the weight of accusation had finally broken me. Meanwhile I cultivated allies outside the house, a cousin who owed me a favor from childhood, a neighbor who'd seen Daniel leave at odd hours, the cashier at the jewelry store who remembered the cash payment. I didn't want to rush. Timing had to be surgical. Revenge, I'd learned, was not a roar but a series of precise, quiet acts that, when assembled, became unavoidable. I also set a trap. I confronted Daniel twice in private, not with the ledger but with questions designed to make him slip, to reveal arrogance or contempt. The first time he laughed it off. But the second time, when I mentioned a name I'd found in his ledger and watched his face harden, he muttered something under his breath, a careless phrase I recorded on my phone. Small victories stacked on each other, and with every one I felt the old hurt giving way to a cold, disciplined focus. I rehearsed how I would present the evidence, not in anger, but with the calm certainty of someone who had waited long enough to see the pattern in full. I pictured their faces when the curtain fell: disbelief, then the slow crumbling of trust, then the raw exposure of the brother they'd adored. I imagined Daniel's smug smile dissolving into something smaller and more human. But even as I planned, a sliver of doubt whispered, what would I become once they saw the truth? I pushed it aside. Questions of identity could wait. For now, justice, or what I believed to be justice, demanded action, and action required that the pieces I'd collected be assembled and delivered at the right moment, so that when the truth hit, it would not be a rumor or a suspicion but an incontrovertible revelation that left no room for excuses. Sada, the morning I decided to strike felt like the eye of a storm. Eerily calm but charged with the electricity of everything I'd been holding in. I woke early, heart steady, and moved through the house like a ghost, collecting the final pieces that would make the story undeniable. A bank slip my cousin had secretly photographed, a voicemail where Daniel arranged a hush payment, photos of the jewelry he'd bought the week before, and the ledger entries stitched together into a timeline, so precise it read like a confession. I printed everything on cheap paper, and placed it in a manila folder. The kind of boring folder that would lull my family into the belief that this was nothing more than paperwork, and yet inside it sat the instrument that would cut through decades of complacency. I rehearsed my words aloud until the cadence felt right, not theatrical, not crying for sympathy, but measured and calm, the voice of someone who does not need to shout to be heard. I pictured the living room, where we'd always gathered for birthdays and sermons, imagining that same space inverted, a tribunal, where the accused would finally have to look at the evidence they had helped invent. I arranged for my cousin to sit in the back, the neighbor who'd seen Daniel leave to be present, and I texted my father a line that would ensure everyone stayed. "We'll need to talk. Tonight. All of us." The hours crawled. Daniel moved like a man who believed in immunity. He joked with our mother about trivial things, his laugh too loud, his hands fluttering when he thought no one watched. I could sense him, as if he carried a scent of arrogance that had no idea the storm was aimed right at him. When my family assembled, their faces were a map of expectation. Pity for me from some, curiosity from others, and that steady trust in Daniel that had become almost religious. I started slow, reminding them of the nights the safe had been opened, of the 12,000 gone, of how our lives had shifted. I let silence do its work between sentences, feeling the air thicken with the weight of what I would reveal. Then I walked them through the timeline, dates that matched Daniel's sudden purchases, receipts in his handwriting, the ledger entries, the voicemail where he negotiated a payoff, the secret meetings with the jeweler. Each artifact I laid on the coffee table like a small, undeniable truth. Faces changed first in the periphery. My mother's mouth tightening, my father's hand going to his forehead. And then the central collapse, Daniel's jaw dropping, the practiced mask dissolving into a flash of animal panic. He tried at first to laugh it off, to charm his way out with the same ploys he'd used for years, but the receipts were precise, the timeline irrefutable, and when my cousin produced the bank slip that matched an entry in Daniel's ledger, his fabricated story had nowhere to land. He sputtered, then snapped, then attempted blame, but each attempt only dug deeper. The family's faith fractured in real time. The quiet that followed his admission was not pity for him but a stunned, accumulating sense of betrayal. As the room exhaled the truth, I felt a strange lift, a grief for what we were losing combined with a hard, necessary lightness. The lie that had hung over our heads was finally unhooked. Yet even in that moment of victory, when applause might have been expected, what rose instead was a river of questions about what we would do next, how we would heal, and whether the name they had pinned on me for so long could ever be untangled from the memory of trust broken within these walls. The silence that followed my reveal was heavier than the accusations that had once crushed me. My father sat back in his chair, eyes closed, as if replaying every moment he had believed Daniel's lies, every sharp word he had spoken against me, every sigh of disappointment he had let hang in the air like a curse. My mother's hands trembled in her lap, her lips moving without sound, as though she were praying or begging the universe to undo what had just unfolded. And Daniel was no longer the golden boy. His shoulders hunched, his confident posture collapsed, and for the first time in my life I saw fear flicker behind his eyes. He tried to lunge forward, to grab the papers, to shred them into nothing, but my cousin caught his wrist before he could move. "Don't," my cousin said, his voice flat. That word sliced through the room like a knife, and Daniel froze. I felt my own chest rise with a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. They finally saw it, not my weakness, not my supposed betrayal, but his. My father's voice, low and hoarse, broke the silence. All this time we blamed the wrong child. He turned to me, his eyes glassy with something between guilt and sorrow, and for a moment I wanted to forgive him, to erase the months of shame. But then I remembered the nights I cried into my pillow, the way every eye had avoided mine, the sting of being branded what I was not. Forgiveness would not come so easily. I stood, shoulders squared, and said, "I carried your blame because he was too clever to let you see his face, but I will not carry it anymore." The weight lifted as the words left me, replaced by a strange clarity. This was not just revenge, it was justice. Yet, as Daniel's face twisted in desperation, I knew this was not the end. People like him, who thrive on manipulation, rarely surrender quietly, and deep in my bones, I sensed he would try one last move to claw back his power. Daniel's desperation erupted like a dam breaking. His voice, once honey smooth, now cracked and jagged, filled the room with frantic excuses. "You don't understand. I did it for us. For the family," he shouted, his hands clawing at the air as if trying to snatch back the dignity slipping through his fingers. But the more he spoke, the more tangled his lies became. He accused me of planting evidence, of conspiring with cousins to frame him, of being jealous of his success. My father's face hardened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. My mother, for the first time in her life, raised her voice. "Enough, Daniel! Enough lies!" The room vibrated with her fury, a thunder I had never heard before. Daniel staggered back, stunned by the loss of his last ally. But like a cornered animal, he lashed out again, turning his venom on me. "You think they'll love you now? You think you're the hero? You'll always be the shadow, the forgotten one?" His words were knives, meant to reopen the wounds he had spent months carving. For a heartbeat, they almost worked. I felt that old ache, that doubt, claw at the edges of my victory. But then I saw the folder of evidence on the table, the eyes of my parents fixed not on me but on him, and I realized the power had shifted completely. He was unraveling, not me. I stepped closer, my voice low but cutting. "You branded me a thief, you made me an outcast in my own home. But look at yourself now, stripped, exposed, and small. This is who you are. The words hit him harder than any slap could have. He collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, his body shaking, not with guilt, but with rage at having been defeated, and in that moment, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph, because the truth had finally burned through. Sorrow, because the brother I thought I knew was gone forever. My father looked at me, his voice breaking as he whispered, "What do we do with him now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with consequence. This was more than exposing a thief. This was deciding his fate, and by extension, the fate of our family. Sejiao Daub. Tianda. The silence after my father's question stretched like a noose tightening. Daniel sat hunched, trembling, but not from remorse. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal searching for an escape. My mother finally spoke, her voice steady now, colder than I'd ever heard it. He stole from us. He stole from his own blood. And he let his brother carry the shame. That cannot be forgiven. Daniel flinched at her words, as though they carried more weight than any punishment. My father leaned forward, his voice iron. This family was built on trust. You broke it. You will return every dollar, and you will face the law for the rest. Daniel shot up, wild-eyed. You can't do this to me! I'm your son, your favorite. The word, favorite, cut through the air like a confession, shattering whatever illusion remained. My father didn't flinch. He picked up the manila folder, the evidence that had once suffocated me but now condemned Daniel, and held it up. Not anymore. The words were final, a verdict. For the first time, Daniel's mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. He fell to his knees, begging, his hands clasping at my mother's dress, but she pulled away as though his touch burned her. My cousin dialed a number on his phone, and moments later, headlights flared outside. The neighbor I had confided in stepped in with a police officer he'd known for years, summoned on my cue. Daniel's protests turned into curses, his voice cracking as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. This is your fault. He screamed at me, spit flying, veins bulging in his neck. I didn't answer. I simply stared, my silence louder than his rage. As they dragged him away, I felt a strange quiet settle inside me, not joy, not relief, but something like release. The house had been purged of its poison, but the scars it left behind would remain etched in all of us. My parents looked at me then, guilt etched into every line of their faces. My father's lips trembled as if to say I'm sorry, but no words came. I turned away, because forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a long, jagged road, and we had only just begun. The night Daniel was taken away, the house sat in uneasy silence, as though the walls themselves were trying to breathe again after months of suffocation. My parents hovered near me, their eyes wet with guilt, their mouths opening and closing like they wanted to say 1,000 things, but knew no words could undo what had been done. I let them stand in their silence. For once, I didn't need to beg for their trust or claw for their love. The truth had done the speaking for me. I walked into my room, the same room where I had cried into pillows, where I had stared at the ceiling wondering if I was cursed to carry shame forever. But that night, it felt different. The shadows no longer mocked me, they bowed to me. I sat on my bed and breathed, slow and steady, like someone learning what freedom feels like after a long sentence. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the family. The same mouths that once called me a thief now whispered my name with something closer to awe, even regret. Some relatives reached out with apologies, others with excuses, but I accepted neither. Their pity was no crown to wear. My parents, though, tried harder. My father placed a hand on my shoulder one evening and said, "We failed you." My mother cooked meals she hadn't made since my childhood, setting them before me like offerings. I saw their efforts, but the wound was deep, and healing would not come overnight. Still, for the first time in months, I felt the sting of betrayal dull into something less sharp, something bearable. And Daniel, they said he sat in a cell still cursing my name, still weaving lies no one believed anymore. Perhaps one day he would find remorse, but that was no longer my burden. Standing in the doorway of our home, the sun setting behind me, I felt the weight finally lift. They had branded me a thief. They had broken me with their doubt. But in the end, I exposed the truth, and the liar they worshipped was unmasked. I didn't just clear my name, I reclaimed it. And as the night wrapped around me like a cloak, I whispered to myself, steady and sure, they will never doubt me again.